Well, welcome to this month's edition of Midlife and Thriving, where we are guiding midlife women back to the most important relationship of their lives with themselves through the art of self-care. And joining me this month is a wonderful friend and colleague and peer and incredibly experienced holistic, I'm going to say holistic practitioner, Helen, but I know that you're much more than that. But this is Helen Gormley. So first of all, welcome, Helen.
Wonderful to be here, Yvonne, and so delighted. And thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, my pleasure. Helen and I actually met it was a networking hub, wasn't it? And we just happened to get talking.
It was.
And then realised that we were working in the same field, and from there grew a very fruitful friendship. It's been absolutely fantastic. And really glad to have you on this show, this recording for the newsletter, and really wanting to dive into this whole topic around self-care and, whether it's selfish, is it not? But I thought before we even start, I really wanted to refer to the term selfishness, because I decided, well, let me just look it up just to kind of give some context to what it is. And it's the quality or state of being selfish, exclusive regard to one's own interest or happiness, that supreme self-preference which leads a person to direct her complete focus to the advancement of her own interest, power, or happiness without regarding those of others. And I think it's really important to kind of set the context of what that is, because I often hear from people that they feel that self-care is really selfish, hence they don't do it because they feel it's so selfish. But actually, I think when we unpack it and we realize that self-care is all about empowering ourselves up to be able to serve and help others from a position of energy and power, it makes a complete spin on that statement of being selfish. Anyway, with that all said, Helen, I'm going to just dive into the first question with you. And really, let's have a look at your own personal experience. What role has self-care played in your life and your career?
Thank you, Yvonne. I think it's interesting, actually, when you were talking and defining and setting the foundation around the whole notion of self, I think is quite interesting here. I suppose that selfish definition that you shared, which was really helpful, but also that whole thing about self-care. So I think there's something there to unpick. I think that the what I've realized in my own life and my career is the importance of self-care to be able to sustain, whether it's my career or my life and other things that I've taken on in terms of caring and various things like that. So I don't think it's something that's something we do and then never revisit it. It's a constant journey of thinking about really what the practice is that allows you to have that balance, if you will, but also I think also to help around the notion of clarity as well of our lives, but also just maybe as well the realization that can change through different stages of our life and different demands. And that's the important bit of reflection, to actually think about that in that way. I also think that in a world of doing, that sense of being and creating space to do nothing, to be solo, to be alone, to do all those things is something that when you say it, it sounds very obvious and very simple. But a lot of the time when I do say it, a lot of the responses are, or that's interesting, or I'm curious. So I think those are sort of things that I've further, I suppose, reflected on over the years, and certainly certain practices have been very important to facilitate that spaciousness.
Great. And it's interesting that you say that whole thing about when you've spoken and said about, having that time, that solo time, that time for self, that slowing down, because I remember delivering a piece out in nature, and it was for a team of health providers, and for them, their schedules are so tight. for them, taking this kind of like 2 hours out was a huge deal for them. Like they felt like, oh my goodness, is it even going to be worth it? And so they actually came with with a little bit of like almost pushback at having to be there. And at the end of it, in fact, probably the person who had the strongest pushback, she said, I cannot thank you enough. She said, I didn't even know that I needed it. I didn't even know that I needed it. And now that I've had it, I can understand the purpose. I can understand why this is so important. So it is really important to reflect on it, but actually to experience that stillness, that slowing down, to actually understand the need of it, that it actually is serving a purpose.
Correct. And I think that, until you embody that or experience it, prior to that, possibly it was a badge of honor or a habit to say, yes, I'm very busy. Okay. So that's what, certainly in lots of environments I've worked in, that has been seen, of working those long hours. And I think that just maybe as well, it's giving yourself permission sometimes to experience, take that step back, and then to realize that just something as simple as that, although wonderful, of course, but can fuel your energy and your cup so much more than maybe what society is leaning into or thinking that you need more of, or whatever it is. So that's a wonderful example, I think. And I remember from my own sort of practices, particularly drawing an analogy with yoga, for me, just doing some yoga on the grass, just on the ground or wherever that is, just feels for me that connection with nature and that groundedness that I need. And that might only be for a few minutes as well. It doesn't have to be, again, I love what you've said, because often I get pushed back to say, I don't really have the time. My question then is that true? Because it's just how we choose to spend that, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as you've just said, Helen, it's not about the quantity of time. It's how we, those moments that we choose. So if it's a 2 minute, it's a 2 minute. If it's a 2 hour, it's a 2 hour. Fantastic. But it doesn't have to be one thing or the other. It's what you decide is absolutely relevant and necessary for you. And I really want to speak to you about kind of, you touched upon like certain environments, because in a high performance environment, and I know that you spend quite a lot of time in high performance environments, I mean, is there still a stigma, misunderstanding around prioritizing self-care?
I think it's a very interesting question. I think it can be misinterpreted, I suppose, sometimes as seeing where people are maybe very connected with self. Maybe it could be interpreted in a negative way. It depends on the culture. I think a lot of things are changing in a very positive way, though, that greater sense of awareness. And I think over the past years, in terms of the collective level of what we've all been through, if you will, and that the realization that, that just maybe, people just being on Zoom team calls, all the time, isn't really a productive opportunity, if you like. But also, I think it's important then, in terms of maybe in terms of the culture around that well-being piece and how actually that's positioned as well. So, that sense of actually that people are able to take that time, that space, work in different ways, work in different spaces as well. So I think there's work still to be done, without a doubt. But I also think what's a very important aspect here is those conversations and those connections where employees are also speaking up and sharing that what will work for them as well. So I think if the art of the conversation is very important here, in that psychologically safe space as well.
Yeah. So right. And absolutely, there has to be this sort of balance on, both sides, if you like, of the table, be it the employer or the employee, that there needs to be wins for everybody, right? And that definitely takes, that's what the conversations are about, getting that balance for the employer, knowing that actually when we give that space, we win because we have people who are more likely to perform at a better level because they have had all the rest and the repairing, etc., they need. And the employee being able to say, well, you know, my employer is giving me space for this, and that appreciation brings with it that kind of willingness to kind of stay in the role, to stay with the company, to stay in those spaces, and kind of reduce what we see a lot of at the moment, which is people leaving lots of industries because they don't feel cared for, looked after, heard in any shape or form. So, like you, I'm an absolute optimist in that I believe, and I will continue to believe, that things are changing. In some places, probably better than others.
I think there's a piece here as well, Yvonne, just to shine a light, not to take us on a tangent, but we could. I think there's also an opportunity here for new ways of working as well. I think there's an opportunity to look at creativity, to look at innovation, to look at all these different things, potentially with a beginner's mind and a new lens, because I think often just maybe in these high pressurized environments, we keep doing the same. And a lot of it can be very not in terms of productivity, motivation, all of those factors. And it just maybe feels a little challenging and a little fearful maybe to do it differently, or look at it differently, or to look at how, maybe we support our staff in terms of learning and development, those sorts of things as well. So I think the word space is a wonderful word to use here. And but again, if we do it the same, we get the same. So how can we look at this slightly differently for an ever-changing world as well? So I think that's really important just to position here, but also to create the space where people can come together on cross-cutting themes across teams and other things to share some thoughts on how things can look different. What I'm seeing as well, for a lot of people, they are continuing their learning and development and training, in lots of different spaces, because learning is very much more accessible than ever it was. So you've often got a team that could be offering something that maybe they're not already, but you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, I'm hearing that. And just to kind of bring people to the table to kind of understand that you spend quite a lot of time, or you do spend some time sort of within that education system, as it were. And it's interesting because, again, the education industry is one where there is a lot of high stress. There's a lot of demand, on how people show up and what they're contributing. So it is, very heavy on achievement and productivity. And so I'm wondering, sort of in that space, how is self-care regarded, both in terms for, let's say, the leaders, the teachers, and even for the students?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Yvonne, and thank you for opening that lens here. And to give a bit of context, yes, I've probably been in the field of education all my life, really, but certainly in terms of the working, because obviously, I went to school, but certainly, for the last, many decades, if you like, both as a teacher and lecturer and other roles. So I think, and now I work at different higher education institutions as well, both with staff and students. So quite a lot of, I suppose, insight currently, and I'm a parent of a teenager as well. So quite a few things here, I think, to say. I think one of the things I think that, and I have worked a lot with different schools as well, and teachers and that side. I think that the environment has changed dramatically, and I think there are a lot of external demands and internal demands, that's for sure, and it has changed and is ever increasing. There is no doubt about that. So I think the important part here is about the self-care and the well-being of all, and developing those cultures of
Yes.
of wellbeing cultures, coaching cultures is a key thing, and that's for all. So I think, you know, in certain work I've been involved with, that's something I've been passionate about. And I think the psychological safe space is so important, where everyone is able to put their hand up and say what's working and what isn't for them. I think that and I think things are changing, but there's work to be done, is what I'm saying, as well. And I think there's another piece here, maybe, just maybe, and I reflect as a teacher, when I started many decades ago, thinking I had to have it all worked out and I had to have all the answers to everything. And the biggest shift, and this is many decades ago now, but the biggest shift was when I realized that actually, you know, for example, in a technology class, some of the students knew a lot more than I did. So how could I bring them into that learning space more, if you will, as well? So I think there's things I've learned personally, which meant that gave me a bit of space as well in sometimes quite stressful environments. So I think that's the important part here, so that there is a greater sense of balance as well for all, and that people are able to put their hand up and say what's working and what isn't, whoever they are. But also there are different ways to create that space that doesn't necessarily have to be fixed in a certain environment, i.e. a classroom. Back to your point earlier about being in nature.
Yes.
I could say a lot more about it, Yvonne. There's a lot there, but ultimately there's a greater awareness, definitely.
Yes, and I'm really pleased. I mean, I'm delighted to kind of hear that, Helen, because certainly from my own experience with somebody in my family who was very much in the education system, had an incredibly stressful job that has absolutely led to, you know, mental health issues, that any industry, not just the education industry, but any industry, needs to be really raising that awareness and having these conversations and looking for the solutions for all. As you said, it's not just about the teachers, it's about everyone. How is everyone ensuring that the things that need to get done are getting done, but that they are also having that space, and I do feel that is a really great word, for self, because it's kind of essential. It's a necessary part of our well-being. I mean, there's no other way around it. And and when I've seen people under huge amounts of pressure, that's the very thing that's missing, is the space. There is no space. It's just like back to back to back to back to back. And that's definitely the thing that needs to change.
And there's work to be done, Yvonne. There's definitely work to be done.
Yes, definitely. And the more conversations we have, and that's pretty much, you know, this is why having these conversations are so important, because if we don't talk about them, nothing changes. Everything begins with a conversation, and then we can, you know, as you said, be innovative and creative and start looking at, well, what are the solutions? We've talked about it. Now what?
But I think also, is there a piece as well for me? There's something, and again, in my other work I'm involved with, when I work with people one-to-one and all different things there, it comes back to a point we made earlier about habit, but also sometimes just maybe we're waiting for someone to say, oh, yes, you can take a break, or we're waiting for permission, or whatever the narrative is. And I think that's the really important bit. But also, just as you said, you know, having those conversations, you know, realizing that it doesn't have to be that way. There are choices, or, you know, that actually, you know, you're worth this. You know, this isn't how it has to be. So I think there's lots of narratives, but there's lots of, if you like, potential light bulb moments to get greater clarity as well, which is really important. But a lot of the time we don't share that, how we're really feeling. Indeed. I mean, that authentic piece.
Yeah, 100%. That is an absolute definite. And there goes where half the problems are, because no one can solve anything if they don't know what the thing is in the first place, right? Nobody can do anything about it. So not having those conversations, not expressing, just saying yes, I'm fine, or, you know, getting your head down and getting stuff done, doesn't help anyone and doesn't solve anything. Now,
and we get conditioned to say that. I've gone to a
yes,
place when you've just said that, just randomly, of when I first started teaching, and that would be the conversation people would, I was a trainee teacher, and they'd say everything all right, and you almost went fine. And we used to, I remember with some of the other PGCE students, we'd say, when we'd have our reflection time, we'd say, what would happen if you said, actually, I'm not actually, all this is happening, and actually it's, but we didn't, if that makes sense. But the point I'm making is that's what we need to change.
yeah, and that is almost like the conditioning. It's like the expectation is that I am fine and I am getting everything done. Therefore, when I'm asked, I'll just say yes. I'll just say it's okay. I'll just say yeah.
What does that mean?
That,
What does it mean I'm fine?
what does it mean, and how is that helping anybody, self or otherwise, in that moment when fine is absolutely not the word. Feeling great is not what you're feeling. You're experiencing something very different, and so having that honest space where you can say, actually, it's been really rough this week, or whatever it is, and being able to lay that out and just saying, how do I move from this? How do I make this better? And who's here to help me or support me to do that? Because one, it's giving yourself the permission to vocalize, and then just saying, and what's the support? What's the system of support that we have in any environment that helps somebody in that place? Because I think also, if people feel like I must be the only one because nobody else is saying it, that's another reason to shut down and not say anything.
Absolutely. For all those reasons, sharing your vulnerability, that's sometimes, when it's not, maybe feels psychologically safe, those are all factors in it. But being able, to do that feels a very liberating thing. And I've certainly experienced that in my career.
Yeah, brilliant. So now you're deeply embedded in holistic health. So what do you think are the biggest barriers preventing women from prioritising self-care in their day-to-day lives?
I think that's for some, or it might be seen as self-indulgent or selfish because of all the other factors that are on their in their space, if you like. And maybe it's sometimes the societal expectation as well that that women constantly give to others, in terms of careers, families, relationships, all those things, leaving there isn't the room for themselves. So I think there's many aspects to it. And then just maybe as well, there becomes then the habit, if you will, of constantly being compassionate and kind to everyone else, but forgetting to include themselves in that loop. The thing that comes to mind here as well is that I was having some sessions this week, and we were talking quite a lot about procrastination and the sort of, I suppose, science behind it, but not the science behind it, but what that really means and why that is. And I suppose I'm just thinking here, if you were looking at actually what people's expectations of themselves are day to day, I think is that realistic? Is that okay? And I think there are many factors in it. I think by the very nature that you're sharing these interviews and everything that we've discussed over many times, there's a lot more noise in a very positive way, that actually it's so important that we do allow ourselves and give ourselves that space, because ultimately if we don't, it's about that self-preservation. We're not in this for the short term. This is about for our life, isn't it? So it's very important to find that time and space, without a doubt, ignoring what else there is. There'll always be things to do.
Oh, there's always something else, and there is always something else to pull you from the thing that you need in a moment. And it never kind of fails to kind of intrigue me or fascinate me or just bring up curiosity in me when I speak with women, and I could put money on it. It's just like, whenever there's a list of things to do, anything that was on that list that had anything to do with them, are the first things that get pushed off. They just get, no, can't do those, I need to do these other things every time. Now, sometimes that is necessary. Maybe there are some very pressing things. However, that habit, like you said, when it becomes the habit of what you do, then you are continuously putting yourself at the bottom of, if at all, on your list, and therefore never meeting your needs, and therefore really damaging your health. Because this for me is not like the nicety of self-care. This is your health. And without your health, how are you going to go and do all the brilliant things that you are designed to do, that you want to do? How are you going to help all of the people that you want to help if you yourself are not in a position of health? If you are not able to function, and I'm going to say optimally, but anywhere between good and optimally is good, right?
Yeah, so, absolutely.
That thing.
But also,
go ahead, Helen.
Oh, sorry, but also I was just going to join the dots on something you just said before I forget, if that's okay. It was also, though, as well, not waiting for it to happen, if that makes sense. So often when something happens to us, we may get something sadly happens with our own health, that suddenly we realize we're not able to function as we were because of what we've been sort of alluding to here. But actually, how can we, daily give ourselves some space? Now, back to the point we made at the start of this, it doesn't have to be indulgent use of time. It can be short periods of time, but it's just, those are so important on a daily basis. That 15 minutes of how you start your day, whatever it is. But the point I'm making is we often wait for something to go wrong to then address it.
Yeah. I mean, that is ultimately, I want to say, the vast majority of the women that I have worked with, that I have coached, that's exactly what's happened. They've got to burn out. They are highly stressed. Women who have fallen into various stages of depression because everything has been about the external focus, everything that's happening outside of self, and nothing to nourish what is here and now. And you picked up on at the beginning when I was saying about selfishness, and then the thing about selfishness and then self-care, and how perhaps that's almost like the loop where they tie self-care to selfishness because of the self part of it.
Right.
Understanding that when we talk about self-care, certainly from my perspective, when I talk about self-care, it's all the things that you can do on a daily basis, the micro things that you can do to ensure that your cup is full to overflowing, so that when you are dispersing your energy out to help other people, you are not left empty. You are not left with the minus, and nobody there to kind of help you. Because, when you, quite often, if you're the person who's doing everything for everybody else, when your health takes a turn, it's like, well, who's going to do it for me now? Because people are still waiting for me to show up. And I'm the one actually who now needs something.
And I think the other piece to that is, as well, what I find, and I've seen a lot, is that then that habit, if you will, of putting self at the back of the queue can then be, you could actually look at the wheel of life, and it would be there in every aspect of life. So what I mean by that is, even maybe, for example, their career, they're there to help everyone else and go above and beyond. So it starts to become the habit and almost the badge that actually that's what I do. And then it's the realization, oh gosh, I didn't realize I had a choice to do that. Or actually, but I must keep up appearances and do this. I must go to this social engagement, even though I'm so exhausted. And so it keeps on going. And then, as you say, I too do work a lot in this space as well around, sadly. But I think that, the realization that I can actually look after myself is we have to keep saying it.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, it's this piece affects all the other pieces. You're so right. The career. And if we take that kind of everybody first approach, it does spill out into all the other areas. And how can you do anything other than run dry? At the end of that, there is just an empty tank that quite often is a sign of more damaging health issues that will take time to recover from. So for me, it's just like this whole point of investing bits each day is the bit that will hopefully ensure that you don't suddenly now have to take 6 months or a year off to recover from something far more debilitating and something far more harmful to your health.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. So another question for you then, Helen, is there a belief that those who set healthy boundaries and engage in self-care are less loving or compassionate?
Oh, there may be. I think, I mean, it's an interesting, very interesting question. I think that, I think it could be, I think it's probably the reverse of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that coming back to our original, some of the themes of our questions here is, for a lot of people, setting those boundaries is very, very challenging, particularly if you've been somebody that's given. It's suddenly the realization, and often the question that might come back, oh, you've changed, you know, because you're not so available or whatever it is. So I think it's, so it could be definitely perceived in that way, where potentially people have been able to utilize your kindness and compassion on daily basis, if you will. But I think that the important piece is clear that for everybody there needs to be some boundaries in place.
Yeah, definitely. I remember.
I don't know if that answers your question, Yvonne.
Yes, it does. It does. I did some research on LinkedIn. Actually, I kind of contacted some of my female connections and asked them some questions. And there was one lady in particular that she was amazing, but she was saying, nothing comes above my self-care. She said, I've been called selfish, self-centered. I've been called a bad parent because I've got 3 children and I still put my needs first. She said, but what they don't understand is 2 of my 3 children have special needs. And if I am not looking after myself, who is going to look after those children? Who is going to look after my children? So whilst they're thinking that I'm selfish and self-centered and it's all about me, what I'm actually doing is ensuring that I am replenished and that I am nourished for the job that I have, for the life that I've chosen and for my children. And I loved that response because nothing but compassion and love there. She realized, though, that compassion and love started with herself. She needed to have that for herself.
And I think one of my favorite quotes around this, I mean, I've got several quotes, but one of them I've just got here because I have a little notebook here. Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. And that's from Brené Brown. And I really hold on to that because that's so important. And the other thing I just wonder, Yvonne, as well, when you were mentioning that, and that was a really insightful you know, and you know, very heartfelt story. I think the other piece is, I just wonder, I remember, you know, if one really knew what self-care meant in terms of that embodied, that back to the person that you mentioned in the going out in nature, when I've run retreats or been part of retreats, until we've maybe experienced it, how do we know what it really means as well to look after ourselves? So I think there's a lot of narrative, there's a lot of confusion potentially, but I think if you really feel it, I mean, I'm a meditator and I've been meditating for quite a long time now, and for me, that's so important. But you know, so we know what we know as well. I suppose there's an element here of that. So I just wonder, I know in the work that you're passionate about, and I am, you know, if we're giving people, when I'm running different things, giving people some little nuggets and some tools and some different experiences here that they can bring into their everyday. Just maybe that makes it accessible, makes them realize, that's what it is. Because I think for a lot of people, they don't know. They think it's going to the gym, which might be an element of it, but
Yes. So, and I think I can remember having several conversations, and it was the same sort of thing that was coming up around self-care. It was, going to get my nails done or going to the hairdresser. And listen, all of those things are elements of self-care. Of course they are. They're doing something nice for yourself. But deep-rooted self-care, the care that begins with the inner self, is not about the hairdressers and getting your nails done. This is the work that needs you to be, to give yourself permission to have some space to be with you, to actually listen to what your body is asking of you, because it's always asking something of you, and most of the time you don't hear it because you're just too busy doing everything for everybody else or getting stuff done, and actually starting to really connect with yourself. And you're right, Helen, if you haven't experienced it, that may just even sound alien. And self-care for me is experiential. It is something that you bring yourself into and you feel it. You feel the power of meditation. You feel the power of, like for me, doing like my PQ, my positive intelligence, my PQ reps. For me, it is going out into nature and finding a spot and just sitting quietly. And that doesn't matter whether it's 2 minutes or half an hour or more, and allowing nature actually to do the speaking, if you like, to be showing me things that I can see and then and take lessons from. That for me is the self-care that I certainly work with, and where I feel we don't get enough of. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's understanding that the breadth and the depth of what self-care is.
I think so. And I think also the other thing, just to add to what I think you were alluding to as well, is that deeper work that we have to do. Some of that's not the easy work. Yes. Some of the other things are the easy work. But that time and reflection and those things are sometimes not easy. And I know that. I know that personally. And, we do the work. It's that discipline. It's that, leaning into what's there. Sometimes I don't want to hear what's there, but I have to lean into it. And I choose to lean into it.
Indeed. And totally get that. I think that there is, again, when we think about, what comes up, well, if I do stop and I do listen, I may hear things that I'm not ready to hear, or I don't want to hear, or I won't know what to hear. All of that comes up. And yet, when we choose to do it, when we find that way, when we make that connection, like for me, that's when the magic happens. And that's when we find the things that truly fill us and lead us to thriving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, Helen, we could talk all day. We know this because we have done a couple of times before. As opposed to us doing that, I'm going to ask, what's a closing note that you would like to share with anyone who's listening, watching this video?
I think it's been wonderful to be part of this, Yvonne, and I'm delighted to. I think that a couple of things really. I think that the whole thing of our conversation and our meeting is that we are all working it out. We're humans working out and navigating all of this. And the more we can share and have the conversations, I think is the real where the magic happens. And share those moments. I love the quote, "We're all just walking each other home," by Ram Dass. I think it's a powerful reminder of our shared journey, I think, and the importance of compassion, connection, and support along the way. So, reaching out, I think it ties in perfectly with our theme of self-care and collaboration, because I think that's what we're about. That's why we're here. But also, for everyone listening and beyond, I think that's so important, that we're not alone caring for ourselves. But also, when we do that, we're better equipped to walk alongside others with that kindness and presence. That's what I think the bit that's important to say here, that as a result of that, what we bring to the world is something very beautiful and wonderful. So it's the self, but then beyond. And that's, I think, really important message I'd like to share.
Beautiful. I love that, Helen. And I would second that. And for me, I always kind of say it's from the self and then the ripple out. So it's not self-care for the selfishness sake. It's the self-care so that I can show up and be more and do more out to others and watch that ripple effect. More people, more connection, more community, more love, more compassion. And my goodness, our world needs it. Yes,
absolutely. And that's where the magic is. And we all can be a part of that. And that feels a wonderful thing. And so it's really, really important.
Fantastic. Helen, thank you so much for joining me for this chat. I'm loving these conversations. It's just, every time
wonderful.
I'm having one,
thank you, Yvonne.
It's filling my cup. So it's just so gorgeous, and it's lovely to kind of have the input from other wonderful, brilliant women like your good self who are working in this field and trying to and having an impact and helping people, as you say, like come together and do this journey and support each other. So thank you so much for the work that you do and for joining me today.
And likewise, thank you, Yvonne.